Hey.
Okay, and we're live, or we should be live. Let me
Yeah.
double check over
Yay.
in YouTube. I'm doing this. YouTube's a little slow.
Mm.
Okay, I just want to make sure it picks up before we do this whole thing. There it goes. Okay.
Okay.
Hello, hello, and welcome to the Literary Roadhouse Book Club. Today we're discussing Underground Airlines by Ben Winters. I'm Anais. Our guest today is Namen Gobert Tilahun, a California-based writer whose words have appeared in IO9, Fantasy Magazine, Queers Dig Time Lords, Stone Telling, Full of Crows, The Big Click, Faggot Dinosaur, Spelling the Hours, 1111, and others. He was named one of 13 Bay Area writers to read in 2016 in 7 by 7 magazine. His debut novel was published by Nightshade Books in June 2016. The Root is a second world epic and urban fantasy set in modern day San Francisco, filled with gods, sinister government agencies, and worlds of dark, hidden magic just below the surface. You can learn more about Namen at his website, namen.org. That's NAAMEN.org. A link is also provided in the show notes. Welcome to the show, Namen.
Thank you. I didn't realize you would be reading that out loud. I thought it was for like the show notes, so it's extra long. Sorry about that.
It's absolutely fine.
Mm.
And also with us today is Gerald Hornsby, as well as a former two-time guest who we love so much, we just had to bring her back as a regular host, Tamara Woods. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
I was saying in the pre-show that I'm like Donald Trump. I'm like super thirsty today.
For the same
Yeah.
reasons.
All the time.
Just don't
Yeah.
start sniffing.
I know.
Actually, I haven't gotten over my ash cough. So the
Oh.
volcano here has been going off. Like it went off like almost every day for 9 days in a row, and I developed a cough. It's not
Oh,
fully
geez.
over, so
Oh.
weak and fragile. That's me.
There you go.
So-
Delicate.
So let's dig into the story. Let's start how we always start, which is just at the top level. So we all know where we're at. How do you feel about the story? Let's start with Namen.
Well, I'm an atheist and I needed Jesus and whiskey to get through it. So when I read the second half, I put on Aretha's live gospel album and just let that play because I needed something.
I can't.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Gerald?
Well, I feel almost inadequate now. Yeah. It's I liked the premise, but yeah, it's all a bit James Bond for me.
Okay. Tamara?
I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. No, we're going to figure out how we feel through the discussion. As for me, I think I probably liked it more than I disliked it. Though there's like a few things where I'm like, did you have to do that? And there's some other things. I think the thing that I appreciated the most was the attention to detail surrounding the alternate history. Like, and then this act, and then there was this compromise and that give and take, which we can get into why I thought that was pretty effective when we get, further into discussion. But I think one of the things that probably makes us a little uneasy and like the thing that we all should just kind of get out is there's a lot of controversy surrounding this book about not so much just the premise, but it's the fact that this premise is being written by a very successful white author talking about slavery and racial issues in America. And I thought we're going to talk about politics throughout this entire discussion. So let's just
Yeah.
have like a baseline there. So how do you feel about that, Namen?
Well, here's the thing. Him being a white author doesn't mean he can't write this. Matt Ruff wrote a novel, I think last year, called Lovecraft Country, that dealt with H.P. Lovecraft and a history of slavery, and was lauded by a lot of people. The problem is that the research wasn't done. The premise was okay, but the extension of it wasn't there for me. And this is his 8th novel. And my question became, has he ever written about Black people in any of his other novels before this? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So the question is, why are you interested about writing about us only when we're in chains?
Tamara,
Okay.
or
Let me get a little.
I can jump in, which I would just say I did read an interview where he said what had inspired him was the Black Lives Matter movements and the state of race relations. Now, like, there's a lot of parallels and parts of this story to today, obviously not the slavery and some other aspects of that, but like there's some things that he was trying to highlight race issues as he sees them today. So whether he did that right or wrong. So the way that I see it is I agree with Naman that I don't think being white disqualifies him from writing this, but it also doesn't shield him from criticism. So discussions like this are a good critique to what he has done. And so he's not the first author of Black or white to write about this. But people have been talking about this for decades, and yet we still need to talk about this. So I've read some criticism that's like, well, he's not the first to do this. Okay, that's fine. He's not the first to do this, but in this discussion needs to keep happening. And what we can talk about is he contributing to this in a helpful way? And that could either be wholesale yes or no, or it could be piecemeal. There could be some things that I would argue there's a few things that I think were effective and some other things where it's like, maybe you shouldn't have gone there. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps anyone else develop their idea about the controversy of this.
Well, I mean, another question I just had was, we all should reckon with race. White, Black, Latino, Asian, we all need to reckon with race. So why not reckon with race from a white point of view? I think that's what's lacking in literary circles. So why not write this whole story from the point of view of the preacher? Or from the point of view of even the mother, Martha. We should all reckon with race in our own ways, and I just thought that was a really missed opportunity.
So let me see if I'm understanding correctly. So what you're saying is, if you're recognizing Ben Winters as like a good ally, maybe he's most instructive in like teaching other white allies, like, this is what we should be thinking about, and this is how we should be thinking about our role as white people in this activism and in this greater context.
Exactly.
That seems fair to me.
While I was reading it, I was thinking about, I had this conversation with my mom, and my mom's in her 70s, and she's where I got my love from reading from. And we were talking about diversity in literature and how when she was growing up, there wasn't a lot of representation of African Americans at all. And then when we kind of start becoming more popular in media, whether it's books, movies, what have you, it was very poor representations of us. Everybody was in the ghetto, everybody was prostitute, gangster, whatever. And we're from small town West Virginia, so nothing in that, represented us at all. And so she kind of stopped tuning into things that featured Black people because it was such a bad representation. While I was reading this, I felt like my problem, one thing that kept putting me out of the story was that the main character had so many insights on how the white characters thought. And that just felt odd to me, but they didn't appear to have any insights on how any of the Blacks in their surroundings, how they thought, or they weren't relating. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that just felt awkward to me. I think that there, of course, when you are in some type of situation where you have to be subservient and you're kind of a slave to everything that's around you, whether it's an actual owner or the government or what have you, that you're going to have some insight into the owner, the master. But I felt like it went too deep into that, where I don't think that he necessarily would have had that much insight. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think also later on in the book when they're talking to the guy from the cotton plantation clothing manufacturer, and he said, we look at the sort of recitation blocks. We have 4,000 head in there. So I thought, okay, that's how this guy views them. And then the author goes on to say, we don't just encourage them to go to the gym, we make them go to the gym. And it's almost like he's sort of punching you with the attitudes of this white guy. And I thought, well, we're pretty intelligent people. We can pick up on nuance, and I felt that he overdid some bits sometimes.
Well, and I think that ties into something I noticed as well, in that I felt like he wanted the evil white people were very stereotypical. There wasn't a nuanced portrayal of racism, which happened and still happens. He wanted the evil white people to be very caricaturish so that the white people he featured, like Martha, could look very heroic in comparison, which I just thought was very odd.
Yeah, though I think I'd push back on that a little bit in saying that Father Barton was kind of nuanced in that he was like he was criticized heavily throughout the book for the white savior complex, where he's totally gonna help Black people and free the slaves, but it's on his terms, and he can't even trust the people that he's working with. Especially it looked like Maris and Cook and all of the Black people. So then there's a weirdness there where it's even an ally is racist, and that's the closest you got to that was with Father Barton.
Mm-hmm. I did think that was nuanced.
Yeah, so he was kind of nuanced, and then there was side characters that you didn't hear much of, but that I thought a story when you were saying from the perspective of the white person, whose perspective might have been interesting, the lawyer in Alabama who had argued in the Supreme Court about intent, and then by the end of his life is guilt ridden and is basically sheltering a underground airline cell.
And the thing that I wanted to know more about was Texas. After he talked about how Texas had had the open land policy where basically come and claim, which a lot of states did in their early years, and what you had was manumitted slaves and Catholic Mexican abolitionists rush in, take over Texas, basically make it a free state from the jump, and then secede. I was like, that's an interesting story. I would have loved to see that story.
Yeah. In fact, only getting the Texas story piecemeal, I found it a little confusing at times. When he's first talking to Slim and he's like, what were you really fighting for? I'm like, I still don't know if I fully understand the Texas issue. And then it was after the Slim where I was able to retroactively piece together that story.
Yeah.
But going to what Tamara was saying about representation, maybe then we should delve a little deeper into the characters. For me, none of the main characters, except for Maddie Newell, does he count as a main character? The slave owner, the plantation worker. I don't know if he counts as a main character, but none of them felt too tropey, but that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily problematic. So I wanted to get your guys' feedback on the characters and what they were representing.
Well, one of my biggest problems with the book was, are we trying to be spoiler free on this book club?
No,
we spoil.
Okay, good. So the sort of end game of everything is this sort of cloning of slaves, and it's very much featured that it's like an ovum in the jar or something. It's something from a Black woman. It's a Black woman who got it out of the shed. And yet the representation of Black women in this novel is so bad. We meet 3 Black women the first one who works at the package office and is particularly described as having rainbow nails and expertly woven hair, which I still don't know what that means. I still don't know what expertly woven means. Is it a weave? Is it braids? Does it look like a basket? I don't know. The second one we get is like the mother thug in Freetown who smokes slave manufactured cigarettes and tries to steal the brown baby from the white woman at the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that and her two sons are very, marijuana use is used within this book to deliberately point out sort of like this sort of thuggish attitude, and it's represented over and over. And then the third black woman we get is the woman who, like you said, is in the lawyer's house, sort of running the cell of the underground airlines. Number one, she left the other black woman who got the thing out to die. That's a note about her. But also she's like, oh, we don't want to go north. People get shot, people. And I'm like, okay, all that's real. What happens when this old man dies? Who inherits all of you?
Yeah, although I kind
your
of...
property.
Yeah. Although this is my just speculating, but I have a feeling, because remember one of the cover stories that Victor has when he's Jim is that he was freed by will when his owner died. True. So maybe that's what's going to happen to like Ada in her cell is what I'm guessing, because she doesn't seem dumb. Like she's probably got that.
I would hope not.
Yeah, she seems smart, but you're right. Like she did leave Luna to die.
And she also just sort of is there for a few seconds. And I really thought about this novel that sort of revolves around specifically slave women's reproductive parts. It doesn't feature black women in that way. Yeah, it was just a real weird historical parallel for me.
Tamara,
well, it's kind of odd because when you look at media, a lot of times black women are kept out of the conversation. So I noted that and I thought, again, okay, here it is again. Well, and I just kind of made my peace with it so I could keep reading and not. So that wasn't a thing that kind of pulled me out of the story as much. That was just like weary acceptance, I guess. Yeah.
I have a random question. Would the story have read better for you if Martha was a freeborn black woman who was trying to get back the father of her son, who the Samson story stays the same, but she's a freeborn black woman? Would that have changed anything?
Well, it would have at least given us a prominent black woman character who was supposed to be sympathetic. I don't think Martha is that sympathetic in the book as she's written, from personally. Especially her description of Samson, which I posted this on Twitter, which is this whole, I expected him to look like a monster, something not human. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. And I just felt like there was, the things that kept pulling me out of the book were these little things, these little notes that didn't make sense, that felt like research wasn't done. Like right after Martha says that, the main character says, slaves can't have their head shaven because often the only difference between black and white people they can tell is like their hair texture. And I was like, that literally makes no sense. That literally makes zero sense. You're number one assuming that there needs to be some European blood for people to have different hair textures, which is patently not true. It just didn't make sense to me. I was like, this seems like something that if you had a sensitivity reader of any kind, they would have looked at that and been like, no, that just doesn't make sense. So there were like a lot of little things like that kept yanking me out of the story, and I just couldn't sort of sink it into it.
Tamara, were you going to say something about my hypothetical where Martha is a black woman?
Maybe that would have made me care about Martha more. I don't know. Because as she was written, I could have taken her or left her. Well, yeah, she wasn't very interesting to me. I wasn't drawn into her character. I really wasn't interested in her story. She felt more like a plot device than like a developed character.
Yeah.
So
And it's all about the main character, isn't it? And he's just, I don't know, he's just a bit too clever, a bit too perfect, a bit too, like, he knows all this stuff, and he's so clever, and he can pick locks and break into things, and Martha is just this person who seems to cross his path, and yeah, it's a means by which he can achieve his end, but she's not. She doesn't come across it. She's not written as a strong character in herself, I don't think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I actually thought it was really surprising that Martha was suddenly like really good at being like a double agent, like pretending. Like,
I thought that
natural. Why?
I thought it was going to come out that she was like actually an agent for somebody. I thought that's where I thought we were headed. I was like, oh, here it comes. But
especially
I thought she was going to be his boss's boss or something that come out in the field.
Well, especially considering how she like started to shake and cry just being in that older black woman's house. And then all of a sudden she was like, we'll sneak into this facility and I'll distract him and I'll do this. And I'm like, really? Okay. You started to cry when someone talked to you a little bit harshly, but now you're going to infiltrate something.
Yeah, she definitely felt not real. Yeah, just not realistic. And then like you said, so there was that line where she's like, oh, I was expecting a monster and then he was beautiful. And there's a part of me that's like, okay, if you were to do this from the perspective of Martha, then it could be about her character arc to become less racist, right? It's not about that. And then when they're at the pool, she's like super insightful with race issues. Her kid's in the pool, Lionel's in the pool, and she's like, look at this white mom coming, watch what's about to happen. Like,
I was like, thank you for white-splaining to him what's about to happen. I think he knows. I think he knows.
That's a word I've not heard before, white-splaining. That's a good one. Like that.
Yeah, so Martha also felt very much not real to me. And then, so the MC, his character arc was the most interesting for me because he basically went from, like, if you see like a spectrum, so obviously like How to Be Black in this alternate reality is like, there's so many ways you can do it, but there's like one main tension that the narrative is playing at, and it's between Kevin or Jackdaw and Cook, where it's like you make all the sacrifices to free all the slaves, or you're in it just for yourself, for your own freedom. And you see the MC move from thinking more like Cook to thinking more like Jackdaw, which was something that I liked, but it felt so sudden at the end. Like, it just, boom, he just suddenly got there. Suddenly he was like, you know what? Yes, I am going to free everyone.
Hard agree. I was like, that switch came out of nowhere. I was like, and I wanted to know more about his history, specifically of why, like, he was just an escaped slave. He didn't have any special skills. He grew up on a dairy farm, and then he was loading trucks for a department store. Why this guy is picked up to be a secret agent? Why him?
4 months
like,
of training is all you need.
4 months of training, and now he can hack things, and he can he's amazing. And I'm just like, why? Because for me, when I read the flashbacks to him in Castle, I placed him as fairly young when he escaped.
I placed too.
Yeah, right? And then it says he was only free for 2 years in Chicago before he was captured, and then 4 months of training, but now he seems to be in his mid to late 20s. So I was confused by that timeline as well.
Yeah, I never got a grasp of his timeline, and it was further complicated by when he was faking other people's stories. So at one point he's like, I'm a man in my 40s. I'm like, oh wait, he's actually not. That's just Jim.
No.
This guy he made up. So that complicated everything.
Did he ever say his actual name, or did I miss it? Like what his real name was, other than brother?
No, that was the only one we were given. Which brother.
Yeah, and Martha asked him, I'll do this if you tell me your real name, and he almost told her his real name, and I thought, why not tell you, or tell us, or
why not tell us?
Yeah.
Can I just know?
Isn't that the most cliche thing? Like, I feel like whenever you want to make a character mysterious in any genre, all you have to do is have them withhold their name.
Yeah.
Name withholding as a plot device.
Why are you withholding it? And also, the reveal of what happened to Castle, I at that point, any little bit of sympathy I had for the main character slipped away.
Because he
I
left
was like,
Castle?
He strangled Castle.
I thought he was strangling
Kills him.
Reedy. Wasn't he killing
No.
Reedy?
He kills Castle. If I'm reading the flashback correctly, he says, and then I put my hands around his neck to keep him quiet after we were trying to run. He kills Castle.
Oh, I thought he was killing Reedy.
He's having a flashback to killing Castle while he's killing Reedy.
Oh.
Oh my God.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
I thought he was killing Reedy.
He definitely is, but he's flashing back. That's when we finally, because this whole time I'm like, well, what happened to Castle? When he goes to Torchlight to find Samson, I'm like, why aren't you looking for your brother too? And that's when you get the reveal that he killed Castle, because Castle was the one who wanted to go back and check on check on the guy, and he was like, no, we can't go back, and then he's like, I held him to keep him quiet, and then he stopped moving and I ran.
Oh,
That's
good
pretty,
spot.
yeah.
Good spot.
Wow. Yeah. Although, you know what's interesting? See, I feel like if you're going to do that as an author, if you're going to make your character so unsympathetic with an act like that, you need to really lay on thick, like, the heat of that moment, what drove him to do that then and there, the fear. And this author, he spent a lot of time, like, explaining, like, settings and sounds, but he didn't spend time with, like, the emotional. Sometimes whenever the only emotions he would like lay on thickly was that the main character Victor is like about to think about memories and he shuts them down. He will not think about his past, and that's it. And then like if you could have gotten into that, like there was a moment where I was like, the first time early in the book when he doesn't want to reconcile with his past, I thought, oh, is this going to have like a Toni Morrison's Beloved thing where like in the beginning the characters do not want to reconcile with their past and by the end of it do? But no, he never really does.
Yeah. Oh, and I want to say I misspoke when I said he was having a flashback to killing Castle while killing Reedy. He was having a flashback to killing Castle while killing Cook.
Cook, yes, he was killing Cook. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. But you need, that I feel like as an author, it's on you to like really get in the character's head during that. Like, what is it, like the fear of, of just basically living under those conditions, so sort of destitute, undernourished, afraid, and just feeling like you are in fight or flight mode. But he didn't really get there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange that three of us missed the fact that Castle, who's such a major character in his earlier life, is killed by him, and we all sort of think, well, where's he gone? Did he just disappear or whatever? And we all missed that he killed him.
Yeah. Three out of four missed that. I thought he had been struggling Reedy.
Because I just found the line right here. Where he goes, and he was scared. I understood that. God damn it, I was scared too. But standing out there in the rain arguing made no sense. We had to go. We had to fucking go. I grabbed him by the neck and told him we were going, and he said no again, fighting and pushing back at me. And I squeezed his throat, and his eyes went wide and wider until he stopped fighting. And then I ran. I ran away alone.
Oh, it's fairly obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, like I thought it was like a tussle, and he ran and left him. I didn't think he had killed him, but it makes sense if he's not looking for him in Torchlight.
Well, and then I was like, why are these last pages to him? You murdered him. Like the last few pages are addressed to his brother he killed.
Yeah.
Well, that's a plot device that I've seen in other novels where like the person who is atoning for the thing that they did when they were young, then writes,
Totally, but I just didn't feel atonement. I didn't feel like he was sad about it. He was like, oh, I acknowledged it happened. Now, brother, I told her all about you.
Yeah, I feel like I really regret what I did to you letter is like a framing device that you see a lot, but this one just didn't explore that atonement.
Yeah, it didn't feel like there was regret. And I was like, okay, so why are you talking to him now?
Yeah. Because he killed Cook? I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So since we've already sort of like jumped into the plot structure narrative, we were talking about how the timeline was sometimes hard to figure out, and this guy who's like a jack of all trades. And then there was also, I felt like, because here's the thing. So I saw a lot of reviews that were like, put the controversy aside, the actual thriller of this book is really, really good. And I was like, a little so I was expecting, all right, I'm going to really enjoy the hell out of this thriller, and I was a little disappointed because there was a lot of things that seemed really convenient. Like, really, at the end, Lou Bridge just comes with one doctor. He doesn't have like helicopters and like a whole SWAT team like waiting to swarm in. Like, really? Like,
well, yeah, I agree. There were like a lot of holes and jumps. Like, why is Cook's partner coming down to get you out of the South? What authority does he have as like an Indianapolis police officer to come to Alabama and get a slave out?
Yeah.
Like, that was never like just weird stuff like that where I was like, okay.
And with a helicopter, so are these helicopters from the marshals? The marshals who are catching fugitive slaves in free states can also just like scissor in on a plantation. Yeah, there was a few things I was just like, why is this going down in this way? Which
it was all, I thought it was almost as if the author was rushing the ending. He's looking at his word count, he's looking at his deadline, and think, oh geez, I gotta finish this thing. So let's have this happen, let's have that happen, and bingo, everyone sort of lives sort of happily ever after. It's just, I don't know. And something Narman said earlier about the first half and the second half, and I thought the first half was better than the second half. The second half seemed to just go jump into sort of thriller plot points, and then we did this, and then we broke in there, and then we magically did this, and it just seemed as though you sort of lost. Again, we've said this before about other books that the first part seems to be constructed or better constructed, and then the second part seems to be just let's get this thing finished because I'm on deadline, and not as enjoyable.
I agree. The second part did feel really rushed. Like the first part, when I was reading it, it was interesting to me because it read kind of like this historical fantasy retelling, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So I didn't read any reviews. I never do. I don't want to be prejudiced when I'm reading and know what other people think because I don't care. I want to see what I think, and then I'll figure out what everybody else thinks. So I had no idea that this was a thriller. I didn't even read the back of the book. So I was like, oh, cool, historical fantasy. This is interesting. What's going to happen? And then the second half kind of dropped that stuff to the side, and it was just plot moving really, really quickly, almost too quickly. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is what's happening now. Oh, it felt like not two different books, but it was just two very different vibes from the different parts for me.
Yeah. I agree. The second half felt very rushed, felt very blam, blam, blam.
And I think towards the end where we went from having this hard disk in this padded envelope, and it's all about the hard disk and all about the proof and the data, and oh no, it's not. There's this egg in a liquid. I just think, oh, I didn't see that coming. Where was that telegraphed? Where was that hinted at? Nothing.
Also, I'm glad you brought that up because I felt the cloning thing was ham-fisted. I didn't like the cloning thing at all. I also felt like it completely undermined the rest of the message of the book because the rest of the book is setting up this parallel between so here's this alternate history where slavery was never fully abolished and it's being done sort of piecemeal on a state-by-state basis. And then we're comparing that to our real life, and the livelihoods of the free Black people in the free states is, you can see those parallels clearly. So there's a strong commentary about the way that, even that free Black people today, it's like comparing it to this and having those two realities be familiar, even not exact, but familiar, says something about the world we live in today, right? And then you throw in this cloning thing, which completely, to me, undermines the sociopolitical commentary. All of a sudden, it's like, I feel like here's the problem. I feel like if you're not woke and you're a little racist, then all of a sudden it's like the cloning thing becomes the thing that crossed the line. Then every other places where you could have crossed the line are no longer the place where you crossed the line. You moved it to a realm that's so unrealistic that you're undermining the real points and how they apply to the world today. I just didn't like the cloning.
Yeah, and I think the conspiracy about shipping the product to the Far East and then shipping it back to mainstream America and into the northern shops, and I thought that was good. That's a great sort of conspiracy twist, and I like that. and you can see how someone might, and as you say, transposing this alternate reality to present times, and it's, I think it's, if you're going to make a social commentary, you have to make it relevant to people now who are reading it, and so they can understand the commentary and think, oh, so yes, I can see the parallels there. But cloning, no.
Well, and I think something that stuck out for me were the absences of things that I thought should have been talked about. Religion being one, which would have tied into slavery and the cloning thing. Because what's the resistance to cloning that we have today? A lot of that is religious resistance. So that could have tied those things together for me. But also the absence of, and I find that a lot of people do this when they write about race, is that they go, there's white and there's black. And no one else is sort of involved in this, despite the fact that Native people were enslaved and that Native people owned African slaves, which was something I wondered about in this book. I was like, okay, so what about those situations? And I also noticed that, Europe is sort of set up as this, well, they look down on America because we allow this. And like the South America has people who make raids. And I'm like, so where are the slave states selling anything to? And then it's like they sell everything to China. Like,
Really?
there's something here that's not quite clean in the milk, and I can't point to it, but it's just, it made me uncomfortable in terms of like what was absent from the narrative and what was included for people that weren't white or black.
Yeah, though I feel like the Asian thing, it was almost kind of like a copy paste of if you're doing the transposing thing. So then the other Asian nation that gets mentioned early on is Japan. And Japan has the strongest sanctions against the slaver states. And then with China, in our real world, when there was a country that is sort of like misbehaving according to like UN rules or whatever the global entity is, and they're imposing sanctions, it's always China who's like, oh, they're not going to sell you stuff, but I will if you give me your oil, Sudan. Like, so I feel like in a way, I don't even know if the author like is here like, Chinese, so evil, or just like this is what we're seeing in real life, like copy paste.
Well, I mean, maybe, but also he could have done Russia. He could have done a lot of Eastern European countries. Like there are a lot of options there. And I think that every small choice reveals something about your thought process. I'm not necessarily saying he is racist against Asian people. I'm just saying that maybe he went for the easiest option when he could have done something else.
Yeah. But I feel like the Chinese comment, it's like, it's almost a little bit like, it's such an afterthought. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, 'cause you're saying it reveals your thought process, but I almost feel like he was so focused on the white and black tensions that I don't think he thought about Native Americans. Like, this goes back to what you said about research, the not having done the full research on the history of that. Like, I really think he just, like, it was just like he grabbed the headline with the Chinese thing, like Chinese selling in Sudan, like that example, like, okay.
No, and I totally think that's the thought process that is revealed by that. That what his focus was and what he didn't care to focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the point of cloning? It was the point of the cloning to get more slaves cheaply, because there's plenty of places in the world where you can ship people who are in poor conditions and who are, I mean, we have some form of slavery in the UK where people are brought in from Eastern Europe with big promises, and so there's, why cloning? Why would you do that? I don't understand.
I feel like
sure either, to be honest.
I thought the implication was, at least for me, that if they were clones, then they weren't technically people.
Yeah, it was illegal.
And so the sanction, it was like a legal workaround. So then like the sanctions could go away or stuff like that, because then they wouldn't technically be people with souls, which was the part where I was like, maybe religion should have been brought into this book a little bit.
Not only that, but it seems so short-sighted to me as well. That's why I really didn't like the clone thing, because like you're just undermining everything. And now I'm thinking like, okay, so let's say you get your clone thing going, slaver states. Then instead of having only abolitionist groups, now you're going to have groups for also the rights of clones. Like morals are morals. People aren't going to be like, oh, that's a great loophole. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's a great loophole. You did it.
Good call. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, especially because then he's also making, I felt like this book was touching on a lot of legal things. So the thing, so we've been harping on a lot of the negative. Here's like the one, my biggest positive is I like the amount of effort he put into all the different names of the acts and the compromises and the amendments and this back and forth, because the language to justify this is the same language that we use in our current laws to justify systemic racism, which I thought that parallel was super clever there. Like the way that there was all these euphemisms and the way that you just change words, and like even the word choices that he used when he was in the diner and it's like, oh, all the food here is cruelty free. And then in our world, we talk cruelty free, you know, like we're talking about like animal products, and then like comparing these two things is so jarring. And that's the kind of thing, you know, like there were these parallels between the way that we live guilt-free with while coexisting with horrors, plus the way that we legislate that, right? So there was the Fugitive Persons Act, which was basically that if a runaway goes into a free state, then law enforcement has to help capture them and return them to the slaver state. But then there's the Moore Amendment. If you're a black police officer, you don't have to do it. You can abstain from engaging in that. And I'm like, this is how we do this.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was the most effective part.
Which maybe goes back to the main character maybe should have been the lawyer.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I thought that, like, the history of the world was much more interesting than the thriller aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if he had focused on that a little bit more, if he wrote basically a John Grisham book in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I focused more on the history aspect of it. I think that's why I was more interested in part one, because I started looking at, okay, ooh, cool. So what happened? Why were these certain states still involved in the slavery trade? When did these other states become free states? And I was kind of confused as to why North Carolina and South Carolina just became Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting because the two states were established like in the 1700s, late 1700s. So I was like, well, why? So like North Carolina and South Carolina, the fact that they existed had nothing to do with slavery. So why did that happen? And then I'm from West Virginia, so I noticed that in the map, because I'm a map person, because I'm a straight up nerd. I have a map on my wall over here, but you can't see it. I noticed that West Virginia was separated in the map, Virginia, West Virginia, but West Virginia became a state during the Civil War. So I was like, well, why would they have separated if the Civil War didn't happen?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a couple of little things like that kind of pulled me out, because I overthink stuff like that, I guess. I was just like, what?
Hey,
Yeah.
it's clear I'm an overthinker over here too, so
Yeah.
there's no shame on that front. But I think you're right. I think that was the thing, is like I was saying, there was like a lot of little things that sort of didn't make sense, and there was no reasoning within the world for why that was the way it was. I wondered about like Lincoln's death being the thing that like brought this compromise, when I was like, I don't know if the Civil War. Anyway, it just historically it didn't line up for me in terms of Lincoln's assassination, making this compromise what happened. What I thought would have made a lot more sense to me is if the North and South had actually separated and become alternate countries, with the South staying a slaveholding country.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would have made more sense. The piecemeal thing was part of what it didn't exactly make sense in terms of like, so all these states are clean hand states. So you're telling me that all four of these slaveholding states, their entire economies are from selling things to only China. So from what we learn.
Yeah, well, he does comment on that in the book, which was he says they trade with each other and they trade with like not China and a few like bad actors out there, and it's like, and if it's surprising that they could still be prosperous, it's because they have no labor costs, like very low labor costs was kind of like the quick explanation. But I feel like there's a part that's a little bit like, I don't know. Like I kind of wanted to run the numbers on that a little bit.
Yeah, because I was like, you do have to also house, feed, keep them
Yeah.
healthy. Like you do have those costs, especially for 4,000 people.
Yeah. Well, the number, it was 3 million for all the states. And it was
3
4,000
million for all the states.
For the plantation.
For that one place, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's all of these. There's now the Bureau of Labor Practices, which has all these regulations. Like there's people coming in through with orange jumpsuits, like taking things off. And, I also thought like this dissection of what kind of torture and punishment is allowed and what isn't, like those things were made much more effective because it's in the language that we speak today. And the one upside to having it be made piecemeal is one of the things that I thought was pretty clever was the states that became free states, not because they're principled, not because they believe in human rights, but because of economic incentives. So they could get war contracts under Truman. Like and you can see that in our own history where like the motivating factor isn't high-minded ideals, it's money or contracts or some other incentive. So there were these great comments about how the America we live in functions that again was undermined for me with clones. Why?
and I suppose from that aspect, it's that is the big thing, isn't it? That's almost the big takeaway that money rules everything, and practices can be compromised in favor of money, and it's a good theme, and it's a good premise for the whole book. But and then just go, by the way, clones. Okay.
By the way, I was thinking about the whole President Lincoln thing too. That because I was like, oh, okay, all right. So when did he die? So Lincoln was actually elected in 1860. So then this world, he died in 1861. I think it was February of 1861. So to me, it kind of didn't make sense because it was saying that the author was setting it up that there were states that were starting to secede from the United States. But then with the death of Lincoln's assassination, then they decided to stop and, stay a part of the country. But why though? Like I didn't know what would have been the draw for that, really.
Yeah, but I got the idea in reading it that it wasn't Lincoln who did the compromise in this alt reality. It was the guy's name was with a C. It was
Crittenden, yeah.
Yeah, it was really somebody else. It was like a senator who had been drafting this, and I feel like in a way Abe Lincoln was kind of like pinned with this like success story in the same way that we in our real history pin the story of Abe Lincoln. Like we say, oh, he was the grand abolitionist, and really that wasn't really his main motive for the Civil War and things like that. And I feel like this story had a parallel there as well in the way that I read it, which was really the senator and other people were doing this, but like for whatever reason, Lincoln became sort of like the figurehead for this due to his assassination and martyrdom. Like that was like the rallying cry, but he wasn't really responsible for it.
I just didn't understand why his martyrdom would bring people back to the table. A lot of those people didn't care for him at all. And if we're doing parallels to today, there are plenty of politicians who would be like, well, sorry, I didn't really like them. And I just felt like it felt odd to me that his martyrdom was what brought people back to the table. And I also questioned why any black people stayed in the U.S. at all. Because at the point where he almost gets those two like white kids approach him and say they're going to sell him like back and like to slave catcher, he probably doesn't have papers. Remember? And he starts quoting the Bible and scares them off. I was like, if that can happen to just any random black person going down the street in a free state, because they imply they're not going to go through legal means. They're going to like sell him back or do something. I'm like, why aren't all the black people in the North going to Canada?
Yeah.
Which has offered like sanctuary. Like I wouldn't feel safe in any of the free states if I could just like, if someone looked at me sideways and decided that they could like point a gun at me and take me back south.
Yeah. Yeah. Although were those two kids, I thought those two kids they were black, one was dark skin and one was like light skin. Like, remember the 172 varietals of African American skin.
Oh, that was a lot of moments in those books. I was just like, what? And then he just randomly forgets. He's just like, somehow I can't do it anymore. Hallelujah. I was like, oh, not because you worked on yourself, just because there was some miracle.
I thought the cataloging of different skin tones was really interesting. Like, I actually liked that. It made sense to me. If black people in this time is seen as kind of just chattel, then all right, there would be different ways to identify and stuff. But I didn't understand why he did just like, oh, and now I can't. It's gone.
Yeah, because
that was jarring.
I felt like his journey was supposed to be one of disassociating from the narrative of slavery almost, and being like, to survive free, I'm separating myself from that. I'm not thinking about that harm. I'm not thinking about that pain. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm going to catalog them like Marshall should catalog them.
Mm-hmm.
But the journey it felt like it jumped. Like it was after two random chapters, he was like, I can't catalog them anymore. And now I'm going to fight for freedom. And I was like, what happened in those 2 chapters? You got beat to shit at a plantation, but you spent your first 16 years like that. So, or however long. So I just didn't understand like that sudden transition to like freedom fighter and woke from like complete disinterest 2 chapters before.
Yeah. So when I first started seeing the cataloging, I was being, giving Ben Winters the benefit of the doubt, being very generous. And I'm like, okay, this is him distancing himself, because he keeps saying over and over, the hardest thing for him is page 7, seeing the face. So for him, if he forces himself to think like a slaver, that he can do this job. So he's like doing this compulsively as a way to keep himself emotionally detached. And then this is something that he is at some point going to unspool in a moment of self-awareness and introspection. And then he's going to stop doing it. I was right. He stopped doing it, but there was no unspooling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why? I mean, the author didn't mention that there's no sort of digital cutoff in the cataloging of, it's if you're this side of a certain line, then you're black, and if this side of a certain line, you're not black, and it was just there are all these different shades, and yeah, we get that, but it's just seemed to be no point to it.
It's true that I think that's really a good point, because if you go back into slavery, colorism did have a lot to do with where you worked, certain states with how high your status was, certain states if you could even be free at all. And so it's like to have that sort of color palette, and I understood they were using it as sort of a description in terms of like wanted posters and stuff like that. But I also was like, so what's the point of cataloging them if you're not separating them by certain lines? If you're not like, well, what there were terms in old Louisiana, quadroon and octoroon and stuff like that. So if you weren't doing that and saying, okay, if you're of this shade and above, your work is housemaids and like nursery, you get to interact, you get a little more freedom, you get a little more, of a quote unquote normal life. And if you're this shade and below, that's when you're working in the fields. That's when you're in like this kind of housing. That's when you're doing this. Because that would have delved at least more into the details of slavery, which I think was something that was lacking in this. He sort of wanted to talk about slavery without going into like the many painful nuances of it. Like he was like, they're Franklins and they do whippings and they do this and they shut you in. But it's like, so some of the Franklins are black. So how does that happen? Because it's implied that some of them might be free blacks. who work in this state. So why are free blacks doing this and not going to a non-slave state? Like, there were just a lot of like intricacies in how the slavery worked in a piecemeal faction that I didn't make sense to me.
And I think if he had done something about the color palette, it would have really hit the skin color theme much harder then. And it is all about your skin color. It's not about what you are or who you are. It's what color is your skin.
Especially with all the history stuff he does. He could have just as easily have been like the 172 varietals was back before the Bureau of Labor Practices as you couldn't classify job occupation by skin tone. Like, he could have done that. It could have been part of the progress of how people are trying to quote unquote civilize slavery, which feeds into this idea of like how we have this amazing ability to use euphemisms and to feel clean when we do horrible things.
Yeah.
So, while I was reading it, I was trying to figure out exactly how do people become free here, other than it being willed or you kind of escaping. Did you guys catch that?
I don't think there was any other way.
Yeah, you had to be willed or escape was all I saw. Yeah.
Yeah,
because sure I didn't miss something.
Because if you look at it in historical slavery, there were ways that people could earn enough money to buy themselves freedom, to buy their families freedom. And I think what he's trying to get at is that with the industrialization of slavery, that sort of option gets phased out. But again, just leaving it absent sort of was like, oh, okay, but there were other ways. Why aren't those other ways still options now? Because especially if you're trying to civilize slavery, one of the ways to civilize it might be, well, it's not forever for some of them. If they're good slaves, they can work and like lift themselves up by their bootstraps and get out of slavery. See, we're good people. Like that would have been a whole point that he could have pointed to.
It's like, remember when Brother, and I can't remember which persona he was playing, but he was pretending to be the guy who was looking for Jackdaw, and he's all, well, I was trying to save up money so I could see my boy, but I wouldn't be able to have enough money to do that anyway. And I was like, was he trying to save up money so that he could purchase his freedom? Well, I was confused. There was just a lot of points, I guess, where I was just kind of like, what? I don't understand what's happening here.
Or was that to purchase the freedom, or was that just like an outright purchase of like, because wasn't there something about like a controlled like value of each slave? So there was like these little things where he would just say it once. So maybe it was just like a straight up, like I could just buy this person and then they could be free. As a free person, I can just like buy people out. But then that's another thing. So how come there's this line about like, oh, everything happens. Billionaires sometimes fly a plane into the middle of a field and have people jump on. Can't a billionaire just like buy slaves and free them though?
Yeah. Well, I mean, why isn't there a consortium of like these countries that are so angry that like form and like buy a whole bunch of slaves to freedom? I mean, I get that probably the southern states at a certain point would like stop selling them. Yeah. But you could get some people free.
Yeah, and I think as a matter of government policy, you don't want to be like, we're paying slavers, we're rewarding them for slaves. But you can see a rogue billionaire being like, I don't care.
You could see a movie star. You could see these people who like, shoot, where's Angelina Jolie in this world? Where is she?
Yeah.
Excellent, yes.
Yeah. There was
she
like
would not approve of this.
No, and there's like one reference to like a movie that they did where the Underground Airlines had a base in the deserts of New Mexico, but that's not real. I'm like, that would have been really cool to explore a little bit more.
Well, also, his love of Michael Jackson. I am not saying anything bad about Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is classic, but it just kept coming up in this like oddly emphasized way where I was just like, do you listen? It almost was like I wanted the reveal to be like Michael Jackson was the first music he heard when he was free. Or like that's why he keeps coming back to it. I wanted there to be a reason that he kept name checking Michael Jackson and no one else. I was just like, and especially because it's supposed to be, I'm assuming modern day.
Yeah.
Like, it's supposed to be 2016 or whatever. So I'm like, so there are other acts around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
You
saying
should
you
be name
can't.
checking Beyonce.
I mean, I can't be neutral on that because I dedicated my book to Beyonce and I stand by that. But she, like, you could have name checked other people. Like, you know, I'm gonna listen to Janet. Keep in the Jackson family if you want. That's fine too. It felt like this weird obsession, and there were like little things like that that made me go, is this one of the only things you know about Black people? Is that why you keep doing this? Like, I know Black people like Michael Jackson, so like I'm gonna focus, and I'm just like, okay.
You know, there's also this list. Again, I feel really disappointed in these like one throwaway mentions of things that he would do, because I probably missed a third of them. And then the ones that I did catch, I'm like, you should have done more of this. He's like naming all the different ways that somebody can be enslaved. So it's in a slaver state and all these different kinds of work, or offshore on a rig, you know, and then it's like, or in a working prison. And that is a direct transposition to what we have today. The argument that our current rates of incarceration and the way that people work for cents in the dollars is a form of modern day slavery. I'm like, you could have like done more with that. Like, if this author in the interview is saying that he wants people to take lessons from this story and this perspective and apply it to real life, focus on the real life. Like, that's a real thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the hour. So then let's do that. Let's take the takeaways. Like, what's the theme? What's the story about? What did you take away from it? We can start with Naman.
I took away that people have done this better. That was I just there were small moments where I really liked certain things that he did. The anger that Jackdaw had towards the priest, I thought was fantastic. The when the older Black woman like looks at Martha and says, "Where's his daddy?" Let me guess, white men killed him, because that's what they do even in the North. I was like, I thought there were like these great moments where I was like, oh, that's so good. But there was just so much else around it that I couldn't. My takeaway was he should have written a different book.
Or the same premise with a different main character.
Yeah. Same world, but different. There's a wonderful author, Justine Larbiestier, who recently wrote a post of, I don't want to do the whole story, but she had a book that came out that had a Black main character. The publisher put a white character on the book cover. And so she sort of wrote about like this problem and it wasn't going to happen. And so she dedicated herself to writing main characters of color. And then recently she was like, so I'm going back on that because I realized that when I write these books, the authors of color who are writing these books aren't getting the deals. I'm getting the deals. So I'm going to go back to writing white main characters, but I'm not going to stop talking about race because that's something we all deal with. So even when I write a white main character, it's not going to be an all-white world, and they're still going to have to deal with race. And I almost wish that Ben had like read that whole post before he wrote this book and been like, I'm still going to tackle this. I'm still going to deal with this, but I'm going to deal with it from an ally perspective and like do this whole twist of like the journey of an ally's mind and what you can do and what not to do. And I think it would have been a much better book than it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think the whole premise, I think the world that the book is based in is quite an interesting idea. We had I can't remember the guy's name, but someone over here wrote Fatherland, which was a different outcome to the Second World War, where the Germans won, and you know we became ruled by the Germans. So I quite like this sort of let's twist history and what if something had been different. But yeah, the sort of, you know, I got a paper clip and I just picked this lock and it just became simple for him to do this sort of undercover spy stuff. I mean, I just thought it's, you know, that I think the idea better than that.
Yeah. Tamara?
Yeah, he was kind of like a MacGyver, wasn't he? there was one thing that threw me out the story too, and it was something very, very small. But every time he said, "All right, all right, all right," I heard him saying it in Matthew McConaughey's voice.
Me too.
All right, all right, all right.
Yeah, me too.
Like every single time, I was like, "Please stop saying that. Please just stop." I actually thought that this was an interesting world that he's exploring, and I would like him to go back and revisit it with more of a consciousness, and I don't know, maybe with talking with people of different races and kind of bringing in a more multicultural look to this world. I liked some of the parallels that he pulled between this horrifying world and the horrors that are now present. Like, there was a line, how did it go? It's like, Black gets to mean poor and poor gets to mean dangerous. Mm-hmm. And he was paralleling, the slums then to what's happening now, and I thought that was really clever. And I think that he did some stuff that was really clever, but it was just, the things that we've mentioned that didn't kind of tie everything together. And so I liked the world. I liked the kind of historical, fantastical things. I didn't like the thriller aspect of this, I think that the thriller things kind of threw me off. And that's why I thought part one was really interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tamara. I think the exposition was a lot better. It's almost like if this had like a Silmarillion accompaniment, like I'm more interested in that. Like, just give me all the different like laws and the acts and how we got here and all the parallels to the real world and how people use euphemisms and rename things in order to get away with immoral and unethical acts. Like, that was way more interesting. And the thriller it fell apart for me, especially at the end. It was so rushed at the end. I still don't understand why they helicoptered into a plantation. I don't know why a Black slave in the plantation could just like get off the subway and walk into the free housing unit. Just things like that.
Yeah, I didn't know why he wasn't stopped or something.
No. Just stroll and I'm just gonna go visit the free white people housing. No big deal. Like, is that really a thing? So the thriller aspect I think had a lot of holes. So we kind of just did our like last sentence recommendations, but if there's any capstones that you guys want to.
Well, years ago, Stephen Barnes wrote a duology called Lion's Blood and Zulu Heart. And so if you're interested in alternate histories like this, I would say pick those up. They're an alternate history where Egypt and Carthage destroys Rome. And so Africa and Egypt become the powers, and Europe is sort of broken down into tribal living, and they are enslaved and taken to an America that's been settled by Islamic cultures. And it's a really interesting book that follows a Islamic slave holder and his Irish slave as they journey through this world.
What was that?
So it's the first one is Lion's Blood, and the second one is Zulu Heart. And they're by Stephen Barnes.
I'm writing it on my wall over here. So it's not just, I have
I'm
a
writing
whiteboard.
it down here to put it in a link in the show notes for our listeners as well when this gets edited. Those sound good. Yeah. Gerald, Tamara, do you guys want to add anything to wrap up?
No, I think we're done.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. All right.
Okay. all right. I'll just do the outro and then we can say our goodbyes. Okay. Oh, I should probably get this open. So, next month, we're reading A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. As you read the book, let us know your thoughts on Twitter with the hashtag LRH Book Club, or leave comments on our Facebook page or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. You should also know that we are morally opposed to cloning reviews, so we need you to infiltrate the review section of our show at iTunes and leave comments so that others can discover our podcast too. And lastly, we lost our laundry bag full of $29,500. How are we going to pay for our podcast peddlers their dues? So please help us by supporting us at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. Naman, thanks again for joining us. This was great.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been
Great
really good.
discussion.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's good.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.